And in this next session, these speakers are going to be looking at two products that have been commercialized and what we can learn from what's worked, what has not worked, and then how those lessons can be generalized towards their future and the next generations of non-surgical sterilants or contraceptives that we have. So with that, I will hand it to Kathy.
Thanks, Joyce. Okay, so I apologize for this, but it's just my particular eyes. So welcome to Lessons from the Field, Market Acceptance, ACC&D, animal welfare organizations, practitioners, animal health entities, academicians, and individuals interested in managing dog and cat reproduction can be expected to share a number of objectives, not the least of which is making non-surgical alternatives available. Two products have been developed, developed, approved, and commercialized for use in male dogs in at least one market, the implant Suprelorin and the intratesticular injection known at various times as Nutrasol, Asterosol, and Zudurin. Suprelorin is an implant of the GnRH agonist deslorelin. It works by binding to and causing downregulation of GnRH receptors in the pituitary gland. Continuous administration results in complete suppression of GnRH effect. Peptech Animal Health, an Australian company, developed a 4.7 mg 6-month implant to suppress fertility in dogs that was approved in Australia and New Zealand in 2003. Peptech subsequently developed a 9.6 mg 12-month version, which received Australian approval in 2006. In 2007, centralized approval of the 6-month implant enabled sales in 28 EU countries, and Peptech entered an agreement with the international health company Virbac to distribute the product in Europe. In 2011, Virbac acquired Peptech. The 6 and 12-month implants are both available in Europe and the UK. Dr. Marie-Paul Lachaud is going to share some information about use and awareness trends in the European market for Suprelorin in dogs in a few minutes. Note that Suprelorin has not been approved in the United States. Zudurin and its predecessors are an injectable solution of zinc gluconate and L-arginine that causes testicular degeneration and permanent sterility. Work on the precursor technology began in the 1980s, followed by formation of Pet Healthcare International, or PHI, where development of Nutrasol continued. Addison Biological Laboratories acquired the marketing rights, and in 2003, Nutrasol was approved by FDA Center for Veterinary Medicine for sterilization of male dogs 3 to 10 months of age. Abbott Animal Health licensed but did not pursue the product, so it reverted to the licensor. Ultimately, business-related issues between PHI and Addison led to Nutrasol's withdrawal from the market in 2005. In 2007, Arc Sciences acquired the international rights and registered the product as Asterosol in Mexico, Colombia, Panama, and Ecuador, and we'll be hearing about its ex-US use in sessions this afternoon and tomorrow. In 2011, Arc acquired the US rights to the product, which was renamed Zudurin for the domestic market and reintroduced in the US in 2014. Talks were underway with a major animal health company, but during the time frame in which that company wanted to monitor Arc's performance, Arc was unable to remain viable and ceased operating in early 2016, and the last inventory expired in March of this year. So A Tale of Two Products, while it's kind of a fun title, is a bit of a misnomer. This session does not focus on the products per se. Rather, a number of people involved in various aspects of the development, commercialization, and/or use of the implant or injection have been interviewed or surveyed and have shared their insights. We're fortunate that they agreed to share lessons learned that can help inform new, emerging, and existing efforts to develop and provide non-surgical fertility control options to a market that is varied, challenging, evolving, and not straightforward. And that's probably one of the themes of these 2.5 days. We're going to be presenting their input this morning, and it is important to recognize that we are talking about subjective opinion based on experience. What's clear is that every step in the process of discovering, developing, and commercializing potential tools has upstream influences and downstream impact. So whatever your role as an individual in the pursuit of non-surgical approaches to fertility control in animals, you'll want to keep the end game in mind, a toolbox that provides safe and effective choices. So right now, Dr. Lachaud is going to share some information about trends that we're seeing in the European market for Suprelorin in dogs.
Okay, so what I'm going to present to you this morning is feedback we got from practitioners, and they're, again, subjective information, and in a very specific population of practitioners. They all have clear interest in reproduction, since they were either volunteer and were agreed to fill in an online questionnaire. These practitioners were participating in the European Veterinary Society for Small Animal Reproduction. And on top of these, we had a few telephone interviews using the same questionnaire with practitioners who are all Suprelorin users. So you won't be surprised to see that there is a 100% awareness of Suprelorin with these practitioners. I would like to draw your attention on the fact that that's really qualitative information, since due to time constraints, the Congress being in June of 2018, we could get the feedback from approximately, depending on the question, 20 to 25 practitioners. So I think that the trends are clear, but I will give very, very few numbers because I think that would be kind of tricky.
Can everybody hear?
Just tell me, yeah? Okay, so clearly in this population of practitioners, Suprelorin is a very well-known product. It has been registered originally in male dogs in 2007 through the centralized procedure, and it was registered as variation in 2010 for the same indication in ferrets, in male ferrets. So in dogs, which the primary use is for the official claim is the induction of temporary infertility in healthy, entire, sexually mature male dogs. But we will see that practitioners are very creative and that there are numbers of off-label uses. So among the practitioners who accepted to participate in this survey, as mentioned, 100% awareness. Most of them have used the products for years, up to, for most of them, 5 to 10 years, so since it was launched, basically. And in terms of how they use the product, they confirm that generally they suggest the Suprelorin alternative to their clients and not the other way around. Based on their feedback, the awareness in owners is pretty high, but again, it's a very specific type of clientele with more than a 50% awareness in owners. And based on their exchange with their practitioners, the clients are typically interested in trying Suprelorin as a test prior to surgical castration. And that probably explains why the vast majority of the market is the 6 months implant. If you want to see how it works in terms of behavior, etc., you're going to go for the 6 months implant rather than the 12 months implant. So we mentioned a number in different countries, in third world countries or developing countries, but it's true in Europe, in the European Union as well. The feedback regarding how people think about castration is very different from one country to the next country, but it might be different from a rural area compared to a city environment. So, and the number of male dogs left intact is certainly above 50% based on the feedback we get from these practitioners, but it makes sense compared to information that we have from the literature, etc. Of those who are not left intact, 25% are surgically castrated, and approximately the other half of these dogs are treated with Suprelorin. So what are the reasons that these practitioners, again, with a specific interest in reproduction, what kind of reason are they going to recommend Suprelorin versus the surgical castration? I would say at the first point, the owner reluctance to permanent castration. And a colleague of mine had a very funny, very short story about it. He said, you know, for instance, in southwest of France, where you've got a lot of hunters, they would say they are very reluctant to permanent castration because they say, I quote, no more balls, no more nose. So there is definitely a reluctance to castration, most hunters being male themselves, right, the owners, so they feel like something is wrong there. And the other thing is there is a reluctance related to the risk, the perceived risk for surgery. It might be related to age. It might be relating to any kind of concomitant disease or general condition that might be tricky. Other reasons might be used, such as to treat benign prostate hypertrophy, for instance, or perineal gland tumors. It might be related to convenience, male and female dogs for vacation or whatever, living together temporarily. It might be very handy to use Suprelorin in this particular case. Of course, to manage inappropriate behavior such as aggressive dogs or runaway dogs whenever there are bitches in heat in the area. And the primary use that we are going to see in more details, which is a test run prior to surgical castration, so people can have the opportunity, and so had the practitioner, to double check that with this temporary suppression of fertility, the behavior is going to change, the aggressiveness is going to change, and the dog will be happier staying at home. In terms of feedback from the practitioners, based on the feedback they get from the owners as well, no numbers here, but it's really, in the vast majority, is a positive opinion. And so here are a few quotes that are clearly representative of the awareness and the feedback we got from these practitioners. Again, the perfect test prior to surgical castration. A very relevant alternative to surgery, quite effective, even very effective to have a complete regulation of sexual hormones. The negative opinions are more related to, I would say, convenience. A number of practitioners said that even though the nice thing about non-surgical is that you don't have to use anesthesia. Still, it's quite painful, so it's stressful for both the dog and for the owner. It's a little delicate in terms of at the beginning of the treatment and the end of the treatment. In the first 2 weeks, you might have some kind of just the opposite, which means that the animal might be more difficult to handle. And at the end of the duration of treatment as well. So some veterinarians mentioned that what they do is that they systematically schedule the next implant to make sure that there will be no break in the control of infertility, and some just send a reminder. And some owners just give a rein spontaneously because they've noticed that sometimes the testicle size is changing and the behavior, the bad behavior they wanted to get rid of is back. Another negative opinion, or let's say a drawback with the product, is the financial aspects, because it was discussed a number of times this morning that it could be a good alternative in terms of not as costly as surgery. But again, I'm not going to mention numbers because they were very contradictory. And in Europe, it's always delicate to ask people how much they charge, kind of thing. So it was not entirely clear. But I would say my overview, the general impression is that actually if you implant and re-implant, so altogether a 1-year suppression of fertility is going to be nearly as expensive as surgery. So it's not that attractive in that respect. And it might be a limit for using it large scales in population control. So again, clearly the primary use is the test run. People are kind of reluctant, they think of it, they're not entirely sure, and it's a good way to double check whether it might be really an option to go for permanent castration via surgery, which is generally the standard, historically speaking, at least. So what happened next to the first implant in terms of re-implant, and again, it might be balanced due to the financial aspect, but so a number of owners, if the outcome is positive, better behavior kind of thing, then they might go and decide to go for permanent castration via surgery. And for the remaining, it would be, let's say, for half of the people that will decide to go back to what it was before because it's not that worth it, would think about it again and see maybe next season kind of thing. And for the other half of the people not going for surgical castration, they might go for the re-implant. So why do the owners decide to choose reimplant after discussion with their practitioners? Is generally to maintain the effect they observed when they implant for the very first time, which is of course the fertility suppression, the improvement of behavior, and the effect on prostate benign hypertrophy, for instance, or even something you can see very easily, which is the effect to manage alopecia. The other reason why they might decide to go for another implant, again, is their reluctance to surgery, especially they think it doesn't really apply to healthy dogs. So, as mentioned earlier, we have this clearly defined claim in male dogs, but it's interesting to see that practitioners used the suprelorin in other species. We'll see examples in cats, for instance, for female, or for other purposes. So the other purpose, let's say, as a therapeutic approach would be the treatment of benign prostate hypertrophy in dogs. The downregulation is, if we switch to another species, it might be the hormonal downregulation in breeding cats, male cats, or a reduced urine marking in neutered cats. It's also used in female for either induction or suppression in breeding bitches, and to treat or control urinary incontinence, and it's mainly actually not in breeding bitches, but due to spay, so in spayed bitches. So all kind of different off-label uses. So as an overall conclusion, based again on this limited feedback in terms of number of practitioners interviewed, it's clear that for a number of owners, this fertility suppression thing is they're not completely comfortable with it. And there is clearly some reluctance to castration in privately owned dogs. In unowned dogs, in terms of management of population, of course, it would require either a long-term control or permanent castration, so 6 to 12 months, and based on the cost as well, it is not ideal at the moment, so it might not be the ideal tool. And again, the primary use is the test run, so typically in privately owned dogs. And again, we have to keep in mind the financial aspect, which is the fact that the implant plus reimplant for ongoing control is as costly as surgical castration. But it's a clear option in terms of taking the time to think about it, and then make sure that the practitioner and the owner are on the same wavelength to decide to go for permanent castration if that's what they decide to go for. And they can change their mind, especially again in hunting dogs, depending on the season, whether it's a hunting season or not. So it's a nice option in terms of flexibility. And pretty safe, quite safe. There we go.
Thank you. I wish I had the beautiful accent with which to continue, but such is life. At least I don't have the Jersey you expect. Okay, so what about Suprelorin? I really apologize for the hat, folks. I'm not hiding from the authorities. I just, yeah. So as you've just heard, there are indications that veterinarians in Europe use Suprelorin for dogs for several purposes, but it does appear that the primary use is to assess a potential surgical outcome. So people in the US have been asking, why don't we have Suprelorin for controlling fertility in dogs here? And for those of you who were here yesterday, you saw some very eloquent comments from Michelle Kutzler and Linda Rhodes about some of the reasons that we don't have it here yet. However, everything is speculation in terms of what plans Virbac actually has for Suprelorin in dogs in the U.S. Animal health is an intimate industry, and so while Virbac is not involved in this ACC&D session or symposium, we can speculate a bit, which we're really good at in animal health. Virbac appears to be reasonably satisfied with Suprelorin's performance and trajectory in Europe and the UK. Historically, the company has optimized opportunities consistent with its portfolio, so an eventual US launch of Suprelorin for fertility control in dogs would not be surprising. From a strategic point of view, launching Suprelorin for dogs in Europe first made sense. Surgical spay-neuter, as you've heard, is not a routine procedure and is, as you've also heard, illegal in some countries except under certain circumstances. So there's no surgical gold standard on the continent that limits considering non-surgical approaches. Surgery is more common in the UK, where Suprelorin for dogs is also available, and it's positioned on Virbac's UK website as the flexible, reversible alternative to surgical castration. There appears to be no evidence of regulatory concerns or negative data that would prevent a US approval for use to control fertility in dogs. Because Suprelorin is a treatment for ferret adrenal disease, as some of you heard yesterday, Virbac has made it available in the US for that particular use under a provision of the Minor Use, Minor Species, or MUMS Act of 2004. Since treatment of ferret adrenal disease is considered a minor use and unlikely to be the subject of adequate, well-controlled studies in support of a drug approval, Suprelorin specifically for ferret adrenal disease is in the index of legally marketed, unapproved new animal drugs for minor species. Again, it's not an approval, and off-label use in dogs is prohibited. As you could see yesterday, if you were here for Dr. Petrick's presentation, obtaining U.S. registration from the FDA Center for Veterinary Medicine for Suprelorin for use in dogs in the U.S. requires a substantial investment of time and money, so it's likely that Virbac is viewing the feasibility and timing of this opportunity in the context of market characteristics and the company's other potential and ongoing projects. So that is what we have to say today about Suprelorin. We're going to move on now to the input that we received from about 20 interviews of people who were involved in various stories, Nutersol, Asterosol, Zuterin. The interviews were conducted between March and June of this year. Many insights will be relevant to future permanent approaches as well. I think it's clear from what we've heard and what our assembly is here that it's not one market, it's two. The audience for an approach that results in permanent stability, again, is two markets. The private practice market is similar to the companion animal market in that it's a value-based market. Excuse me. The veterinarian or corporate ownership sets the price for a product or service based on operating costs, business competition, and client-based characteristics. Permanent and temporary approaches may both be attractive. The overall objectives are safety, effectiveness, client satisfaction, and profitability. On the other hand, the nonprofit market is more like a production animal market in that volume, large number of animals treated, is responsible for generating the revenue. An interviewee described the nonprofit market as one in which we neuter as cheaply as we can, sometimes in rather difficult circumstances. In keeping with the nonprofit's population management mission, a temporary approach is likely to be unattractive. Safety, effectiveness, and satisfaction in the community served are also among the objectives of nonprofits. And of course, as we heard today with the One Health reference, the success of nonprofit programs is critical to animal population management as well as animal and human health. So who does a company with a permanent approach have to convince in order to become part of a fertility control toolbox? Interviewees mentioned a number of influencers. Each market sector, for-profit and nonprofit, has key opinion leaders, or KOLs, as we call them. Key professional organizations and nonprofits keep track of developments on behalf of their members, raise funds, and serve as sources of expertise, policies, standards, and publications and websites, other information. And of course, there are a number of groups on the front line of population management. Others in private practice who need to be comfortable with non-surgical approaches, of course, include veterinarians, technicians, and other staff members, clients, vet schools, and in large corporate-owned practices, formulary managers. In the nonprofit sector, local community leaders, we've heard about the diverse communities, and it's important to be working with those communities. Media and government, veterinarians, volunteers, donors, all critical to the success of population management programs. And of course, spay-neuter programs and events can't be successful unless owners and guardians are comfortable about safety and efficacy. A couple other concerns that were raised by a number of interviewees. Storage conditions in the nonprofit sector may be suboptimal in certain types of settings, and packaging preferences are likely to differ between the two sectors, especially if the product has to be used within a certain time frame after opening, which is the case with Nutrasol/Asterosol/Zuterin. All of these are things to be aware of, like I said at the beginning, no matter where you are in the continuum of making these products real. So let's take a look at the zinc gluconate intratesticular injection. It's a one-and-done product, or I guess we could say maybe a two-and-done product. Effects are permanent following everybody's awake now, all right. Effects are permanent following a single use. Potential market sectors are inherently different in ways that affect commercialization. The product's been spoken of by some as a game changer, but it's in a challenging market where we have this gold standard of surgical neutering, which we've talked about, and users are generally satisfied. Adoption of new technology is going to require fundamental changes in thinking and human behavior. So, game changer or not, it's been unable to change the game. So I did an interesting thing. I went to the videotape, as they say. I went back to the ACC&D website, and there was a session called Nutrasol. What worked, what didn't, what's next, at the third ACC&D symposium in 2006, the year after Nutrasol became unavailable. Based on his experience, the speaker identified key requirements for marketing a permanent non-surgical technology. So they're paraphrased here slightly, but here they are, and they've all been raised in one form or another by people I've talked with in 2018, 12 years after the 2006 symposium. So some of these comments are expansions based on what I've been told recently. Long-term capitalization, and I would have to add overall capital efficiency. The message is the same today. Don't underestimate how easy it is to underestimate. Running out of funds was a key factor in the market withdrawals of Nutrasol and Zuterin, interestingly enough, at a point in which each company had either begun to solve a problem or gained some market traction. I got some nice inputs about costs. Generally, it takes somewhere between $8 to $10 million and 5 to 7 years to develop and receive regulatory approval for an animal health product. Some of the post-approval costs interviewees mentioned, so after the product's out there, included costs related to getting approval, for example, of a new manufacturing facility, which I think Dr. Petrick alluded to yesterday, tracking the product, keeping a database of dogs receiving the injection, shipping and distribution costs, creating marketing materials that meet regulatory standards. Again, Dr. Petrick referred to regulatory oversight of materials, continuing stability studies to justify expiry dating, and on and on and on. One of the people involved in the Zuterin introduction explained, with all the overhead, the vial with $2 to $3 worth of raw materials ended up costing $35 to $40 in the quantities that were being produced. Creating economies of scale by ordering large batches wasn't viable because we weren't able to sell large batches at that time. Another cost is the cost of dealing with adverse events or possible AEs. It can be very significant. It was pointed out to me that if there's an AE as a result of surgical castration, the client can return to the veterinarian who will likely, hopefully, resolve the issue. But if an AE results from product use or administration, and even maybe coincidental, there are serious costs associated with reporting the AE in accordance with regulations, costs of care, potential remuneration to vets and clients. So in some cases, one AE can put you in the red for the last X number of administrations that have been made. So the message, think of the loaded cost of each product at the end of the day. Education, of course, was pointed out. Technique, in my discussions, hands-on, in-person training on proper administration of the particular approach also emerged as a requirement and as a significant expense. It appears to have been the most effective and AE limiting method of training, hands-on, in person. But several interviewers reported that some veterinarians have resisted the idea of training. I know how to give an injection. I've given thousands of them. Interviewees also reported instances in which veterinarians may have overreacted to a post-injection issue due to inexperience and performed surgical castration. It doesn't quite belong in this little bullet point, but it was mentioned quite a bit, so it's worth mentioning. And it was suggested that a standard post-injection monitoring process via photos at prescribed time points post-injection would be useful to clients, veterinarians, and the company with the product. It's also important to understand the risk-benefit profile of sterilization that's been referred to several times so far, including health and behavioral aspects. As information continues to emerge, findings should be incorporated in strategy, education, and training. It's important to note that each product, and I think this was said this morning, and certainly I've had colleagues that have said it, each product will have a specific profile that will affect its market. Part of the impact is perception. Therefore, we need good science and good data to inform perception. Thank you, Linda. In fact, there's a session on assessing risk-benefit profile of surgical sterilization, I think right here at 3:45 today, so you'll probably be interested in that. Pros and cons of surgical versus non-surgical sterilization. Again, evidence will be important in supporting a potential reintroduction of zinc gluconate product or any non-surgical sterilization method. One thing that was very interesting to me in this 2006 presentation was pricing that reflects advantage over surgery. The implication there doesn't seem doesn't seem to have been that pricing should be commensurate with surgery, which is what I've heard from a lot of the people that were interviewed for this presentation, but should actually be higher. Several people I spoke with cautioned that some veterinarians feel they cannot even charge the same amount for an intratesticular injectable product as the surgical procedure because it's just an injection and the cost would be hard to justify. So in any case, pricing was and is an issue. Some of the drivers of market acceptance that were mentioned, well, the interviewees had a great deal to say about what they would do next time in some of the critical areas. Their input indicates that it's important to understand and leverage the characteristics of users and their audience, that clear, concise positioning and support for a product or approach are important, whether it's intended for the for-profit, nonprofit markets, or both. Communicating with key audiences, identifying, acknowledging, and addressing challenges. These are all very basic ideas about product introductions and maintenance. Let's look at drivers of market acceptance. Did I say that already? No. Understanding and leveraging the characteristics of users and their audiences, clear, consistent positioning and support for a product or approach, whether it's intended for one audience or the other, communication, identifying, acknowledging, and addressing changes. Look at those separately. This is a lot of stuff here. And stakeholder identification. We've noted that stakeholders are among the people who have to be convinced. Who are the stakeholders? Buyers and users. What are their objectives? Who are their stakeholders and what are their objectives? I did skip a little because of time, but I think these will be all available in your on the internet or in some kind of deliverable after the session. Who are the stakeholders, the buyers, the users? What are their objectives? Who are their stakeholders? What are their objectives? Who are the thought leaders your stakeholders rely on? Acknowledge and involve them as advisors. In terms of positioning, the way a product is positioning should be consistent, which doesn't mean it won't evolve. So there was some inconsistent positioning over the years in the Nutrasol-Zuterin story. It's important to figure out which business or service models best serve a given market or markets and develop a plan that relates to the product's attributes. One person offered this advice. Don't put the plan in a folder, never to be seen again, and don't try to be all things to all market sectors if it just doesn't jibe. Present the specific technology clearly in terms of how it compares to other choices private practices and nonprofits may have. Confusing the market isn't a great idea. In terms of product support, make sure users understand how the product works. We've already mentioned the importance of training to reduce the potential of AEs, and I may have actually skipped that, sorry. I kind of got a little lost there. Training also improves confidence in the product and the company or nonprofit and helps address preconceptions. Make training available for veterinary professionals about how to explain the option to clients. It's also important to convey the financial case to veterinarians for non-surgical methods, especially since it appears there's a misunderstanding among some vets about the loaded costs of surgical neutering. Consider developing an app that can be used to compare the surgical and non-surgical alternatives. Soliciting and leveraging feedback on training, communications, and product performance can improve products and strengthen relationships with users. In terms of planning and outreach, multifaceted programs are recommended for veterinarians in the for-profit and nonprofit sectors. Outreach needs to happen even before launch. It's also essential to reach out to veterinary technicians. Technicians with negative impressions can make it very hard. If you don't convince your tech, you won't convince your vet. This is a message we heard a number of times. Understand vet attributes and customize approaches to veterinarians in the context of attitudes and demographics. Younger vets, it has been said, latch onto this better than the 50-plus crowd. In fact, it's important to work with and at least present at veterinary schools and even develop a program for veterinary students if you're working in this area. I don't have some times for some observations about from vet school leadership. If you're interested in hearing some of those takeaways, just track me down. But we are wanting to try to stay close to on time on here. Understand the underlying challenge that really emerged is to understand the significance of trying to modify human behavior and the influence of the belief that the gold standard is what one person called a panacea. The gold standard, of course, being surgical intervention. An interviewee summarized it this way: "This is one of the biggest barriers of all. I've been trained this way. Peers and teachers say this is the acceptable way to go. Why should I change? It ties into surgery as a bread and butter service and as a justification for the cost to the owner." Another challenge is the temptation to avoid that the product will sell itself. Won't happen. There are some sector-specific drivers of acceptance to go over briefly. One size doesn't fit all, even if a technology is applicable for both market sectors. So let's consider a few drivers that are sector-specific and described by those who have been in the trenches. Private practice: embrace and be responsive to veterinary professionals and their clients at a level of service commensurate with what the private practice provides. Understand and communicate the economics, including profitability of a given non-surgical approach, and consider co-promotion programs. Nonprofits: recognize the differences among nonprofits and what those differences mean in terms of how each organization defines and fulfills its mission. Understand and be able to demonstrate the suitability and economics of use in a variety of large volume and community settings. Consider developing for the greater good partnerships with target nonprofits. Reach out to nonprofits prior to deployment to understand what's relevant and what to expect in a given community. I'm getting thirsty here, so the next question really is it possible to serve the nonprofit and for-profit sectors? If so, how? If not, why not? So who's going to volunteer to give us some thoughts about that? I also, of course, have a slide, but come on, somebody, please. I'm thirsty. Do you want people to step up to the mic?
Avid ended up serving both sectors. One, they persuaded the private practices that it was profitable if the local shelter was using the reader, that the local practices would sell 9 times as many microchips. So it's a little bit of data.
So couple it with some other service. Well, what I learned from the 20 or so people with whom I spoke, it's not considered practical in a traditional small company model. An established animal health company with significant portfolio could have the in-house resources to launch and manage a non-surgical product, and indeed, Virbac is doing so in Europe with its non-permanent implant. But there are some issues related to large company adoption, more so if the product is a permanent, one-and-done technology. At this point, private practice veterinarians generally appear to be satisfied with the surgical approach. While the nonprofit market is likely to embrace a permanent product, there's still the issue of price. Nonprofit customers need affordability, and a for-profit company needs an acceptable return on investment. So that was the general input that I got on that question. Another question, what other models might there be? Could alternative, appropriately funded, innovative business models allow a company to serve both markets manage costs, and be profitable. Any takers? Come on, there must be some strategists here, yes? No? Okay. Some of the thoughts that came from interviews would be single-purpose nonprofit organizations, public-private partnerships, a low-profit limited liability company, an L3C, which is a legal form of business entity in some states in the U.S. It actually bridges the gap between nonprofit and for-profit investing by providing a structure that facilitates investments in socially beneficial for-profit ventures. So it's interesting to note that a for-profit company could conceivably have a separate L3C division. A high-volume limited service model, wellness/vaccination/fertility control. I think one of the presenters at the 2013 symposium, I believe it was Dr. Volinsky, spoke about how she implemented this model when the product was still available. And I think her talk and many other useful presentations are archived online at ACC&D.org. There's somebody spoke very passionately about a vertical integration strategy, which sounds fascinating. It's a strategy by which the company administers the procedure and handles the AE. So it's the company that produces the product, administers the product, handles the adverse events. The company has its own nonprofit clinics where they do wellness, vaccination, and non-surgical neutering. That's part of the company. The personnel are trained, they educate the clients, the personnel are on the payroll, they do the spay, neuter days, and other events. They handle any AEs internally, so there's no need to engage an emergency clinic or an outside vet, and the owner pays a set amount per dog. So there is a session at the end of the symposium about embracing the future industry applications for the next sterilant product. And speakers will be talking about disruptive and evolutionary challenges in the next wave of advancement. Sounds very intriguing. So I just wanted to, we've done that, we've done that. See, this is nice, we can really fast forward here. We have a number of lessons that weren't really incorporated in this, and frankly, of all these interviews I did, I'd say this reflects maybe a quarter to a third of what the input was, because it ranged not just from this topic, but to other topics as well. So I've been talking with ACC&D about other ways to get that information out to everybody. So just a few other, originally I called the slide quotations from Chairman Meow, but I turned it to food for thought. You need a variety of end user advisors around the company table, and you need to consider their input. Don't neglect that. Crafting a strategy internally and imposing it on the industry is likely to produce results, unlikely to produce results, as we've seen. When you're trying to make a sustainable business, there are challenges. Some can be internal. A company has to listen to people in the field. People talk to us about their animals. Companies can't be at arm's length from providers. We needed to be partners in treating the dogs. Evidence, not evangelism. Studies and publications can help people get ready. It's just too bad that reproduction is so hard to stop. Taking out gonads is a tool for now. It's not a tool for the future. So how do we get to the future? I don't know about questions and comments at this point, but and we can kind of go back to that if Joyce and company say we have, and Ellie say we have time. But one thing I do want to do is remind you about sessions that are likely to be relevant in terms of market sectors we've been discussing. Assessing the risk-benefit profile of surgical sterilization is at 2:15 today, right here. Lessons learned, field studies with cats and dogs is also right here this afternoon at 4-ish, and continued tomorrow at 10:45 in the library. Intratesticular approaches going forward at 9:20 tomorrow in the library as part of the field science track. Embracing the Future, Tuesday at 4:30 in this room. And I will close with a cherished member of our family offering his opinion. And I'm sorry, I know I got a little messed up because I'm not used to this format, so I skipped at least one major slide, but you're probably grateful for that because it's lunchtime. So thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much. We can overrun a little bit into lunch, but I did just want to say to both Mary Paul and Kathy, thank you for going out there to finding these early pioneers of these products, asking for their input, experience, interpreting it in such a digestible way. We really appreciate it. I know you made a lot of effort specifically for this presentation, so thank you very much. So we have a little bit of time for questions. So has anyone got any questions? If so, questions or comments, you can come up to the microphone, say who you are. One coming.
I'll be quick because I know everyone wants to go to lunch. I'm Sherry Asa from the AZA Reproductive Management Center. And for Marie Paul, could you tell us how much Suprelorin costs in Europe? You made references to the cost relative to castration, but I was wondering, what is it? What is the cost?
Top of mind, because I don't have my numbers. Sorry. Really top of mind, because I try not to focus on numbers due to the number of interviewed, but I would say basically around 150 euros for the initial implant, and I think that's for the for the 6-month thing.
So that would include the veterinarian's charge as well?
Yes, that's the owner cost. Yes, yeah.
Thank you.
So I guess, Marie Paul, you said that approaches the cost of doing it surgically.
Implant plus reimplant, yes. Depending again on the weight of the dog, on the practice, the environment, and the country for sure.
Thank you. Gio?
Yes, Giovanna Massei, Annual Implant Health Agency. I have a suggestion for Kathy. There's a third market, and the third market is increasing dramatically, and it's contraceptives or non-lethal methods for managing wildlife and feral livestock. And we've seen this increasing dramatically, so that's certainly something that should be considered.
Yes, to go into that, we'd be here even longer and the stomachs would be growling even more, but thank you for bringing that up because it needed to be said.
Andy Sparks, International Cat Care. Just an observation about trying to marry up the for-profit and not-for-profit, which is going to be a huge challenge. That needs to be thought of internationally as well as nationally, which creates even bigger problems. And it's not something that I have any expertise in whatsoever, but we should at least be aware that those challenges have faced or been faced in other situations. Things like HIV, drugs, where WHO have been instrumental, I think, in trying to organize policies where those drugs become available in countries where needs are huge. So there are probably other models out there that we can look at that might inform some of the decisions that need to be made with that.
Okay.
I just want to make one more little comment, which I want to reiterate. There is probably 25 hours of transcripts from the folks who were kind enough to spend time talking about this. And so I am going to be talking with ACC&D about how we can leverage all that material, because it was hard to put this together since it was tempting to branch out in ways that didn't relate to this specific topic. So.
Thank you, Kathy. Okay, a final thank you to Mary Paul and Kathy for the presentation.